24 weeks pregnant, my officer husband brought home a woman. Her husband died saving me. I have a duty and responsibility to take care of her and the child she's carrying. I'm planning to give her our house and your job, to provide security for her and her baby. David stood in the doorway and said these words. Dust clung to the collar of his green camouflage uniform. His thick-soled combat boots left 2 dark brown mud stains on the beige wool carpet in the foyer. The woman named Sarah hid behind David's broad shoulders. She wore a loose floral print dress, her hands folded and stroking her heavily rounded belly back and forth. I looked down at my own abdomen. The child inside kicked my rib hard. I picked up the glass from the coffee table and took a sip of cold water. The cool liquid ran down my throat into my stomach. I set the glass back in its place. I looked into David's eyes. You're repaying a debt. You're repaying it with my house. You're repaying it with my job. I repeated the words one by one. David stepped forward. He reached out his right hand, trying to touch my arm. I took a big step back, avoiding his fingers. I turned and walked toward the study on the right. I pulled open the bottom drawer of that oak desk. I took out a standard property relinquishment form. This 4-bedroom, 2-garage standalone villa was now entirely his to handle. I picked up the black marker from the pen holder. I signed, Elena, heavily on the line at the bottom. I walked back to the living room. I placed the document flat in the center of the glass coffee table. I raised my hand and unclipped the employee badge from the collar of my coat. It was a plastic card with a dark blue lanyard, bearing the title of senior account manager at a top-tier national PR firm. I tossed the badge next to the document. The hard plastic card hit the glass tabletop with a crisp clatter. Sarah craned her neck to look at the document and badge on the table. She immediately bit her lower lip and hugged her belly tighter. I didn't look at them again. I walked straight to the entryway, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped out into the cold wind. I drove to the public hospital downtown. I walked up to the front desk, pulled my driver's license and medical insurance card from my wallet, and handed them to the staff member behind the glass window. The nurse handed me a plastic clipboard with several yellow forms attached. I walked over to a blue plastic chair against the wall in the hallway and sat down. I filled in my name, age, address, and medical history with a pen. At the bottom of the surgical consent form for termination of pregnancy, I drew a check mark. 10 minutes later, the doctor called my name. I walked into a white room that smelled of disinfectant. I took off my coat and sweater and changed into a blue paper hospital gown that tied at the back. I climbed onto the high bed in the middle and lay flat. The cheap paper gown rustled beneath my back. The doctor stared at the colored monitoring equipment beside him. He turned his head and asked if there was any family accompanying me in the waiting area outside. I shook my head. The nurse came over, holding an 4-needle attached to a clear tube. The sharp metal tip pierced the vein on the back of my left hand. The cold, clear liquid flowed through the plastic tube into my body. I stared at the glaring fluorescent light on the ceiling. The light gradually blurred, turning into a huge white halo. I opened my eyes again. The room was quiet. The bed was very flat. My abdomen was also very flat. The heavy weight that had been pressing on my organs was completely gone. I pushed off the white blanket and set my feet on the cold floor. I changed back into my own clothes. I lowered my head, pinched the buttons of my shirt with both hands, and buttoned them one by one. My 10 fingers were shaking violently. I took a deep breath, flattened my hands, pressed them hard against my thighs, and held them down. 30 seconds later, the shaking stopped. I pushed open the glass door of the hospital and walked back to the open parking lot. The harsh sunlight hit my face. I opened the driver's door of my car and sat inside. I turned the key in the ignition and drove to the building of the PR firm where I worked. I walked into the elevator in the first floor lobby and pressed the button for the 15th floor. I walked to the door of my boss Michael's office. I raised my hand and knocked on the wooden door, then walked straight in. Michael was wearing glasses and typing on his keyboard. I took a white envelope from my bag and placed it flat on his dark solid wood desk. I said, I'm resigning. I recommend Sarah to take over my senior account manager position. She will fully take over the Wall Street investment bank clients. Michael stopped what he was doing. He took off his glasses, opened the envelope, and pulled out the letter of recommendation inside to read. I said, "She has tremendous potential. Give her the key to my private office. Also hand over my core client list." Michael nodded. "Since you've made the decision, Elena, we trust your judgment." I turned and walked back to my own corner office. I crouched down and pulled a brown corrugated cardboard box from the storage cabinet. I placed the ceramic coffee cup from my desk into the box. I put the black leather notebook from the drawer into the box. In the center of the desk sat a thick black binder filled with client contact information and personal preferences I had spent 3 years building. I left it there. Next to the binder were 3 stacks of highly complex background materials on tech company mergers and acquisitions. I left those there too. I picked up the box and walked out of the office door. I entered the elevator, descended to the lobby, and headed to the underground garage. I drove back to the villa with the garden. David's military SUV wasn't in the driveway. The house was empty. I went into the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. From the deepest part of the closet, I pulled out a black hardshell suitcase. I stuffed my coat, pants, flats, and passport into it. I zipped it up and fastened the locks. I grabbed a flashlight and walked down the narrow wooden stairs to the basement. The basement smelled damp and musty. I went to the southwest corner, turned on the flashlight, and shone it on the gray concrete wall. There was a crack at the bottom of the corner. The crack was deep, running from the center of the wall down beneath the house's load-bearing foundation. Every time it rained heavily, muddy water would gush into the basement through this gap. The home repair estimate from last Monday was still in my pants pocket. I pulled out the paper. It was clear in black and white. Fully repairing the foundation and waterproofing would cost $75,000 in cash. I grabbed the paper with both hands and tore it in half. I folded the pieces together and tore them again. I dumped all the tiny shreds into the black trash can nearby. I walked back up the stairs to the 1st floor kitchen. I placed the 2 front door keys on the marble kitchen island. I took out my phone, opened the home insurance company's official website. I entered my password and clicked to cancel the full home repair insurance rider. A green checkmark popped up on the screen, showing the policy had been changed. I pulled my suitcase to the foyer. I opened a ride-hailing app and booked a car to the international airport. I bought a one-way ticket departing in 2 hours. Destination, New York. A black sedan pulled up in the driveway outside. I opened the rear door and got in. The car started and drove out of the quiet, upscale neighborhood. I arrived at the airport. I printed my boarding pass. I checked in the black suitcase. I passed through security. I bought a bottle of water at a convenience store. I sat on the metal chair at the gate and waited. The plane soared into the sky. I turned my head and looked out the small window beside me. The houses on the ground gradually shrank to the size of fingernail-sized plastic building blocks. 4 hours later, I landed at New York's JFK airport. I took a yellow taxi to a short-term rental apartment in Brooklyn. I unlocked the door with a keypad code. The room was small, with a faint smell of cheap lemon cleaner in the air. I tossed my backpack onto the sofa. I pulled out my laptop from the bag and set it on the narrow wooden dining table. I connected to the room's Wi-Fi. I opened the browser and entered the zip code of the Texas house, going to the National Weather Service website. A red warning icon flashed in the center of the screen. A severe thunderstorm would hit that neighborhood in 48 hours. I opened a new browser tab. I entered a hidden code to log into the PR company's internal scheduling system. This was a backdoor I had left for myself before leaving. I checked Sarah's schedule for tomorrow. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, she had a video conference with a delegation from Wall Street investment banks. Those investors were extremely picky and always demanded to see complex financial modeling data on the spot. I deleted all the financial modeling templates from my computer. I even emptied the recycle bin. I closed the laptop screen. I stood up and walked to the narrow bathroom. I turned on the shower head. Scalding hot water streamed over my shoulders. The day after tomorrow, the storm would turn the basement into a mud-filled pit. Tomorrow, the Wall Street clients would be staring at their screens, demanding data reports that didn't exist. I turned off the faucet. I grabbed a white dry towel and vigorously dried my hair.
8:45 a.m.
It's drizzling in New York. I'm standing in the kitchen of my rental apartment. I turn on the faucet. Cold tap, water flows into the stainless steel kettle. I place the kettle on the gas stove. I twist the black plastic knob. Blue flames lick the bottom of the kettle. I walk to the window. The glass is covered with water droplets. Pedestrians on the street hold black umbrellas. A white garbage truck is parked at the curb. 2 workers in reflective vests are hoisting a huge green plastic bin onto the truck. The mechanical arm groans with a dull roar. The water boils. The kettle lets out a sharp whistle. I turn off the gas stove. I pour the boiling water into a glass French press. Dark brown coffee grounds churn violently in the hot water. I wait 3 minutes. I reach out and press down firmly on the metal filter. I carry a cup of black coffee to the narrow wooden table. I flip open my laptop screen. I type in a 13-digit hidden password. I hit enter. The screen flickers. I successfully log into my former company's internal meeting surveillance system. This system was originally used to record large online presentations. I'm now lurking in the background. The digital clock in the bottom right corner of the screen jumps to 9 a.m. A green square appears in the center of the screen. Sarah's video conference connects right on time. I stare at the screen. Sarah is sitting in that private office where I worked for 3 years. She's wearing a dark gray blazer. The shoulders are too wide, hanging loosely over her arms. Her hair is pulled tight back. She forces a stiff smile at the camera. For small windows pop up at the top of the screen. Representatives from the Wall Street Investment Bank join one by one. The lead man is named Richard. He wears rimless glasses and a crisp custom striped shirt. His background is a massive floor-to-ceiling window with Manhattan skyscrapers visible outside. Richard cuts straight to the point. He glances down at his silver watch. He speaks into the mic. Good morning, Sarah. Please pull up the Q3 financial data projection model directly. We need to assess the risk factor for that tech company acquisition immediately. We're on a tight schedule. The smile freezes on Sarah's face. She swallows. Her Adam's apple bobs up and down. She reaches her right hand toward the black, wireless mouse. In my New York apartment, I take a sip of hot coffee. The bitter liquid flows into my stomach. On screen, Sarah clicks open the blue folder on her desktop. The folder is empty. She clicks through 3 subfolders in a row. The screen shows nothing but white blank interfaces. No data. No models.
No charts.
Richard frowns. He taps his right index finger on the solid wood desk in front of him. The tapping sound travels across the network. Sarah, where's the data? Sarah stammers. She speaks into the mic. Please wait. The computer system is a little laggy. She looks down. She picks up the smartphone lying next to her keyboard. Her 2 thumbs tap frantically on the screen. Through the surveillance system, I pull up another wide-angle camera feed from the ceiling of the conference room. This angle captures Sarah's phone screen clearly. She's texting David.
I zoom in.
The words in the chat box are sharp. David, there are no files on the computer. What do I do? A minute later, David's reply pops up. Just pull up some random spreadsheet to stall. Find an excuse to hang up. Richard lets out a heavy sigh on the video feed. Sarah, our time is extremely valuable. We paid your firm $5 million to handle the PR crisis. Are you showing me empty air? Sarah panics. A fine layer of sweat beads on her forehead. She grabs a white tissue from the desk and hastily wipes her cheeks and forehead. She moves the mouse and clicks the share screen button at the bottom of the video conferencing software. She tries to open a company homepage to change the subject. Her right hand shakes violently. The mouse cursor slips to the option next to it. She accidentally clicks share entire screen. The giant conference screen instantly mirrors Sarah's entire desktop. A red chat window from a private messaging app pops up in the bottom right corner. It's Sarah's chat history with the company's front desk receptionist. The message Sarah sent 3 minutes ago is magnified clearly for everyone to see. These old Wall Street guys are so annoying. David told me to play dumb and stall. I'll just unplug the network cable later and pretend the connection dropped. Richard takes off his rimless glasses. He slams them down hard on the desk. The lenses hit the wood with a dull thud. He points his finger at the camera.
Sarah.
Are you screwing with us? Sarah froze. She looked at the camera. She turned her head and glanced at the large screen on the wall. She stood up abruptly. Her knees slammed hard against the edge of the solid wood desk. The ceramic water cup on the table tipped over. Brown tea water spilled everywhere, dripping along the table edge onto the carpet. The tea stained the cuffs of her gray suit. Several paper documents on the table were completely soaked by the tea. Mr. Richard, let me explain. This is definitely a misunderstanding. Sarah waved her hands. Richard pressed the red end button on his keyboard. His small window disappeared instantly. The other 3 windows also disappeared. The large screen in the conference room turned into a dead black. I watched all this calmly. I moved the mouse and clicked to exit the monitoring system. I opened my personal email. Richard's assistant was named Anna. I had found Anna's direct work email last night. I created a new email. I dragged in the flawless financial projection model I had worked on overnight as an attachment. I typed a line in the body. Mr. Richard, this is the complete risk assessment report you need. I have resigned. If you are interested in a more efficient cooperation model, you can call this number at 3 o'clock this afternoon. I clicked the send button. The green progress bar flashed. The email was sent successfully. 15 minutes later, a company-wide public email popped up in my system backend. The sender was the boss, Michael. The title was written in red bold font, Urgent Personnel Notice and Client Termination Notification. In the email, Michael announced that Sarah was immediately suspended pending investigation. Richard's investment bank unilaterally terminated the annual cooperation agreement with the company. The company would face up to $3 million in penalty compensation. Michael asked the legal department to immediately draft a liability document against Sarah. I leaned back against the wooden chair. I picked up my phone. The screen lit up. An unfamiliar number from Manhattan, New York, was calling in. I pressed the answer button. Richard's deep voice came through the earpiece.
Elena.
I saw your model. 3 o'clock this afternoon. Come to my office to talk.
I said, okay.
I'll be there on time. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the bedroom closet. I took out a black silk blouse and a crisp dark blue wide-leg pants. I changed clothes. I put on a pair of black high-heeled leather shoes. I walked to the bathroom mirror. I picked up a comb and smoothed my hair. I applied dark red lipstick. I picked up the car keys and a black leather briefcase from the table. At 2:50 p.m., I stood in the first floor lobby of 55 Wall Street building. I entered the elevator. I pressed the button for the 60th floor. The elevator doors slowly opened. Richard's assistant Anna stood at the front desk. She was wearing a white professional outfit. She smiled and guided me to the large conference room at the end of the hallway. Richard sat at the end of the long rectangular conference table. He saw me walk in, stood up, and extended his right hand to me. I walked over and shook his hand. Richard pointed to the black leather chair next to him.
Seat.
Let's keep this brief. The model you gave me is extremely accurate. You left that company and took core data with you.
What do you want from me?
I pulled out the leather chair and sat down. I placed my hands flat on the cold marble tabletop. I said, I want the exclusive PR agency rights for your company for the next 3 years. I will set up my own studio. In exchange, I will help you increase the profit margin of this merger case by 15%. Richard stared into my eyes. He tapped the table with the index finger of his right hand. He looked at me for a full 3 seconds. He nodded.
Deal.
Anna handed me a 30-page letter of intent for cooperation. I took out the black pen from my bag, flipped to the last page. I wrote my name on the signature line. I put the document into my briefcase. I walked out of the building. The streets were crowded with pedestrians in suits. Yellow taxis honked their horns on the road. My phone vibrated. It was a text message. From David. He wrote, Elena, Sarah was fired. The company is going to sue her for millions in damages. This has something to do with you, doesn't it? I didn't reply. I opened David's contact avatar. I pressed the red button at the bottom of the screen. I completely deleted his number. I put the phone in my pocket. I hailed a taxi. I got into the back seat. To Brooklyn, I said to the driver. The scenery outside the window kept receding. I looked at the Empire State Building in the distance. According to the National Weather Service's forecast, tomorrow evening, that massive storm will make landfall in Texas as scheduled. The wall cracks in the basement of that house are about to receive thousands of gallons of yellowish-brown muddy water. David will receive an extremely expensive bill. This is just the beginning. A strong wind blew through the New York night. I stood in the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator and took out a carton of whole milk. I poured the cold milk into a glass. I carried the glass to the wooden table. I pulled out a wooden chair and sat down. I lifted the silver laptop screen. I entered the power on password. I clicked on the black surveillance software icon on the desktop. I entered the account name. I entered a long password with mixed upper and lower case letters. I pressed the enter key. The screen lit up. The back-end interface of the smart home system popped up. I clicked on the feed from the wide-angle camera in the living room. The rainstorm in Texas had been going on all day. The power was out in the footage. The system automatically switched to black and white infrared night vision mode. The microphone picked up loud sounds of water and wind. Rain was pounding violently against the living room's floor-to-ceiling windows. David was holding a tactical flashlight. The bright beam of the flashlight swung back and forth across the living room. He was barefoot. He had rolled up the cuffs of his military pants. He stood in front of the wooden door leading to the basement. From the gap at the bottom of the wooden door, dark brown muddy water was gushing out violently. The muddy water flowed across the wooden floor into the living room. The large beige wool rug in the center of the living room was soaked with muddy water. The rug swelled up, turning into a disgusting mass of mud. Sarah stood on the wooden stairs leading to the second floor. She gripped the wooden railing tightly with both hands. She was wearing a white nightgown. She pinched her nose with her right hand. The muddy water backing up from the basement carried the stench of the sewer. David turned around. He placed the flashlight on the glass coffee table nearby. He took out his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number. He pressed the speakerphone button. The phone emitted a dial tone. After a minute, a woman's voice came from the speaker. "Sir, how can I help you?" David shouted into the phone. "My basement is flooded. The foundation is completely underwater. Muddy water has poured into the first floor. Send an adjuster and a repair crew right away." The sound of the customer service representative typing came through. She replied calmly, "Sir, I've looked up your policy. The previous homeowner canceled the full home repair rider before the property transfer. Your current basic plan does not cover foundation damage or flood backup repair costs at all." David's chest heaved violently. He raised the phone. He threw it forcefully at the leather sofa nearby. The phone bounced on the cushion and fell into the muddy water on the floor. David crouched down. He ran his hands through his hair. He pulled his hair hard. Sarah came down the stairs. She stopped on the first step. She pointed at David's nose and shouted, "You ruined my business. Michael, the owner of the PR firm, is going to sue me. Those Wall Street people are demanding $3 million in damages. I'm going to see a lawyer tomorrow." David looked up. He extended his right hand and pointed at the mud on the floor. "Look at this muddy water clearly. The foundation is completely cracked. The repair crew is coming tomorrow. I have to pay a $75,000 deposit. I need to save this house. Hand over the authorization card for your ex-husband's pension account. Use that to pay for the house first." Sarah stepped back. She wrapped her arms tightly around her swollen belly. She screamed, "Don't even think about it. That's my emergency fund. I need it to pay the lawyer. Do you want me to go to jail?" David stood up. He strode to the foot of the stairs. He looked up at Sarah. "You can't win a lawsuit. That money has to be used to fix the house." Sarah turned around. She ran up the stairs with heavy steps. The bedroom door on the second floor slammed shut with a loud bang. I sat on the wooden chair in my New York apartment. I took a sip of the cold milk. The coolness slid down my throat into my stomach. I watched the screen. Time ticked by. I listened to the sirens outside. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand went around and around. The minute hand pointed to 12. The hour hand pointed to 1 in the morning. The hour hand pointed to 2 in the morning. David sat on the sofa in the living room. His feet were soaking in the muddy water. He didn't move. At 5 in the morning, the rain stopped. The sky outside began to lighten. The infrared mode automatically turned off. The picture turned to color. The living room was a mess. The muddy water had receded a bit, leaving a thick layer of yellow mud on the floor. A few magazines were soaked and stuck to the floor. David stood up. He walked softly. He stepped on the mud and slowly went up the wooden stairs. I switched to the camera in the master bedroom on the second floor. Sarah was lying on the large double bed. She was asleep. She had a thin gray blanket over her. Her big belly rose and fell with her breathing. David pushed open the bedroom door. He didn't make a sound. He walked over to the nightstand. Sarah's brown leather bag was sitting there. David reached out his right hand. He unclasped the metal buckle of the bag. He reached inside. He pulled out a black leather wallet. David opened the wallet. He took out a black bank debit card. It was the exclusive account for the death benefits of fallen soldiers. David slipped the card into the pocket of his military pants. He put the wallet back in its place. He turned and walked out of the bedroom. He went down the stairs. He pushed open the front door. He walked out. 7:15 in the morning. Sarah opened her eyes. She sat up. She reached for the leather bag on the nightstand. She opened the wallet. She turned the wallet over and shook it hard. A few bills and coins fell onto the quilt. She turned the entire bag upside down. Lipstick, keys, tissues fell onto the bedsheet. She rummaged through everything frantically. She stood up. She didn't even put on shoes. She ran down the stairs barefoot. She stepped on the yellow mud covering the first floor. She ran to the entrance. The driveway outside the door was empty. David's military SUV was gone. Sarah grabbed the car keys from the cabinet. She rushed out the door. She started the other old sedan. A puff of black smoke shot out of the exhaust pipe. The car tore out of the driveway. I turned off the surveillance software. I closed my laptop screen. I stood up and walked to the kitchen sink. I rinsed the glass. The phone on my desk vibrated. The screen showed Captain Miller's name. Miller was David's arch-rival in the military. I pressed the answer button. Miller's voice came through the receiver. It was very noisy on the other end. There were many people talking loudly and the sound of military boots on the concrete floor. Miller said, "Elena, you missed a hell of a show. You'll never guess what just happened." I asked, "What happened?" Miller cleared his throat. Miller said, "Sarah drove her car straight into the military base. The guards tried to stop her. She rammed right through the wooden barrier at the gate. She parked in front of the command building. She stormed into the commander's office." I leaned against the marble countertop in the kitchen. Miller continued, "The commander was holding the morning staff meeting. David was there too. Sarah, with her big pregnant belly barefoot. Her feet were covered in mud. She pointed right at David's nose. She demanded loudly that he hand over her late husband's death benefits." Miller paused and lowered his voice. She screamed it in front of all the senior officers. She shouted that David had stolen the lifeline money of a fallen soldier. Everyone in the entire office building heard it clearly. David tried to cover her mouth. She bit his wrist hard. David's hand started bleeding. I asked, "What did the commander do?" Miller let out a laugh. The commander's face turned completely black. He slammed the table hard. He ordered the military police to take Sarah to the interrogation room next door. He demanded David remove his shoulder insignia on the spot. He asked David to hand over his officer ID and announced David was immediately suspended pending disciplinary and financial investigation. Miller added, David stood there. His face was as white as paper. The military police took his sidearm and access card. I said, "Thank you for telling me this, Miller. Good luck with your upcoming promotion." I hung up the phone. I placed the phone on the marble countertop. I turned my head. I looked out the window. The New York sun was blindingly bright. Cars were lined up in a long queue on the street. The sound of honking came through the window. That expensive villa in Texas was now filled with mud and mold. That respected officer had now lost all his power and reputation. That woman who had taken everything was now burdened with massive debt and a completely empty wallet. I pulled the curtains shut to block the sun. I walked over to the sofa and lay down. The New York morning was very cold. I sat on the gray fabric sofa. I draped a thick wool blanket over my legs. I opened the silver laptop on the glass coffee table. The screen emitted a harsh, white light. I entered a long, complex boot password. On the desktop, there was a black microphone icon. It was a background recording and location tracking software. Before I left Texas, I had installed it deep in the motherboard of David's phone, using the excuse of helping him clean up his phone's memory. The software interface loaded slowly. The green progress bar moved bit by bit to the right. Finally, a page with a map of Texas popped up. On the map, a red dot was blinking continuously. That red dot was located at a cheap motel next to Interstate 35. The Military Investigation Committee had frozen the account for Sarah's late husband's death benefits 48 hours ago. David had also had his access card and sidearm confiscated by his superiors and was completely suspended. They now had absolutely no source of income. I put on my black over-ear headphones. I turned the system volume on my computer all the way up. I moved the mouse and pressed the play button in the center of the screen. A faint electrical static came through the headphones. Then heavy breathing. Sarah's footsteps paced back and forth in the narrow room. She was wearing hard-soled shoes. The heels struck the cheap plastic flooring with sharp clicks. Asterisk zip. Asterisk the zipper of the bag was yanked open. 2 pieces of clothing were thrown onto the floor. A few coins and a set of keys dropped, making metallic clinks. Sarah was rummaging through things. Sarah's breathing grew faster and faster. She was dragging something heavy. The sound of wooden legs scraping against the floor. Asterisk thump. Asterisk a tin box was placed on the wooden table. I leaned back against the sofa cushion. I picked up the glass from the table and took a sip of cold water. A sharp metallic clang came through the headphones. Sarah had found a pair of scissors. She inserted the tip of the scissors into the lock of the tin box. She pressed down hard on the plastic handles. The sound of metal scraping was extremely grating. I frowned and moved the headphones slightly away from my ears. Asterisk click. Asterisk the metal latch broke. The lid was flipped open and slammed against the wall. Sarah started rifling through the papers inside. They were David's war diary from his deployment in Afghanistan. It recorded his daily patrol routes and engagement logs. David had always kept this box locked in the topmost steel cabinet in the garage, strictly forbidding anyone from touching it. The sound of pages turning continued. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. Suddenly, the sound of pages stopped. Sarah opened her mouth wide and gasped. She slapped her palm hard against the wooden tabletop. She unzipped her handbag. She pulled out a printed sheet with yellowed edges. It was her ex-husband's casualty notification. The 2 sheets of paper rubbed against each other in her hands. Sarah's teeth chattered. She spoke the handwritten words from the diary aloud to the empty room. May 12th, 3:15 p.m. Recon squad ambushed in Sector B. We hid behind an embankment 200 meters away. I saw him get hit. He was crawling on the ground. Sarah paused. She picked up the other sheet and read the black printed text. May 12th, 6:30 p.m. Rescue helicopter arrived. Confirmed death due to excessive blood loss. 3:15 to 6:30. A gap of over 3 hours. A strange, muffled sound came from Sarah's throat. She used both hands to crumple the 2 sheets into a tight ball. The wooden door of the hotel room creaked open. The door swung open. David's footsteps entered. The rustle of plastic shopping bags echoed in the room. I bought a few cans of soybeans on sale, David said, his voice sounding utterly exhausted. Sarah didn't answer. David stopped. The 2 plastic bags dropped to the floor. A few aluminum cans rolled out and bumped against the wooden bed leg. Sarah hurled the crumpled diary hard against David's chest. The hardcover book bounced off and fell to the floor. Sarah extended her right hand and pointed at the book on the floor. You wrote that you saw him get hit at 3:15 p.m. You wrote that you were hiding 200 meters away. Why did you stay there motionless? Why did you stand by and do nothing? You waited 3 hours. You hid behind that embankment and watched him bleed to death. David let out a roar. He lunged toward the wooden table. He reached out and grabbed the remaining diary. Sarah pounced on him. Her hands gripped the hard cover of the diary tightly. David grabbed the inner pages. They pulled in opposite directions. Asterisk rip. Asterisk dozens of pages tore apart. Shreds of paper fell like snowflakes, covering the entire floor of the room. David pulled a silver windproof lighter from his military pants pocket. He pressed the metal switch with his thumb. A blue flame shot up immediately. He brought the torn paper scraps close to the flame. The edges of the paper quickly blackened and curled. The fire spread. Thick black smoke rose in the narrow room, drifting up toward the ceiling. David threw the burning paper ball into the white ceramic sink. He turned on the faucet. Clear water streamed over the red flames. Black ash floated on the water surface. The gray water swirled down the drain. David turned around and stared hard at Sarah. He pointed at the sink. There's no record anymore. You have no evidence. Shut your mouth. Sarah looked at the black water. She stepped backward 1 step at a time until her back pressed against the door. She reached behind her, turned the doorknob, pulled the door open, and ran out onto the street without looking back. David stood still. He grabbed the glass from the table. He swung his arm and hurled the glass at the mirror on the wall. The mirror shattered into countless pieces of glass, crashing and clattering onto the floor. I sit in my New York apartment. I move the mouse and click the export button in the upper right corner of the software. A green progress bar flashes quickly. An audio file containing arguments, the sound of tearing paper, running water, and all of David's roars is securely saved on my computer desktop. I open Google Chrome. I log into a completely anonymous email account. I create a new email. I drag the audio file I just exported into the attachment field. In the recipient field, I enter 3 addresses. The first is the complaint mailbox of the Military Disciplinary Committee. The second is the official inbox of the U.S. Department of Defense Inspector General. The third is the private work email of the military section editor at the Washington Post. I type a few lines into the body of the email. Captain David is suspected of deliberately delaying rescue efforts on the battlefield in Afghanistan, leading to the death of a comrade from blood loss. He used his comrade's death to obtain a hero's medal and seize the comrade's pension. The attachment contains a complete recording of him admitting his presence on the scene and destroying key diary evidence. I move the mouse. I press the blue send button. A green checkmark appears in the center of the web page, indicating sent successfully. I close my laptop. I stand up and walk to the kitchen sink. I pick up a dry towel and slowly wipe the water stains off the marble countertop. David burned the paper diary. David thought he had erased all traces. He must be sitting in his hotel room now, surrounded by shattered glass, plotting how to continue weaving his lies. He used that false combat hero, Halo, to gain everything. He used that Halo to take over my house. He used that Halo to replace me at my job. I walk to the bedroom and change into a crisp black professional suit. I grab my car keys and a black leather briefcase. I'm heading to 55 Wall Street. Richard has already rented an entire floor of office space for me. My new public relations studio officially opens for business today. I push open the apartment door and step into the elevator. The elevator descends rapidly. I exit the building and hail a yellow taxi. The taxi weaves through the crowded streets of Manhattan. In a cheap hotel room in distant Texas, David's phone will soon start vibrating violently. Military police jeeps will pull up outside the hotel with blaring sirens. Several fully armed military police officers will kick open the thin wooden door. They will place cold steel handcuffs on David. David will face the highest level of military court-martial. I look at the skyscrapers outside the car window. Sunlight reflects off the glass curtain walls, dazzlingly bright. The taxi stops at the entrance of the building. I push open the door and step inside. 10 a.m. I'm in my office at 55 Wall Street. I place a silver tablet on the mahogany desk. I pull out the leather chair and sit down. I tap the screen with my index finger. The screen is playing a live broadcast from a local Texas television station. In the footage, David sits behind a long folding table. He's wearing a cheap black suit, the shoulders wrinkled. His hair is slicked back tightly with gel. In front of him are 5 black microphones from different television stations. A heavy-set man in a gray shirt stands behind David. David has spent his last bit of cash to hire this third-rate public relations agent. David speaks into the microphones. He lowers his head, covering his face with his hands. I've been the target of a smear campaign. Hackers fabricated the recording. That woman wants to destroy my reputation. I've always been protecting the widow of my fallen comrade. My conscience is clear. David looks up. He pulls a white handkerchief from his suit pocket and vigorously wipes the corners of his eyes. About 20 journalists are seated in the audience. Several cameras are mounted on tripods, their red recording lights glowing steadily. I glance at the digital clock in the lower right corner of the computer screen. 10:14 a.m. Last night, I set up a scheduled send function in my email. The recipient list includes the public work emails of all 20-some journalists present at the scene. 10:15 a.m. A dense buzzing sound suddenly erupts from the tablet speakers. In the live footage, the phones of the journalists in the first row light up. Then the phones in the second row light up. Almost all the journalists lower their heads to look at their screens. The heavy-set PR agent frowns. He leans down and whispers something into David's ear. The Washington Post reporter sits in the center of the first row. His name is Smith. He's wearing a khaki jacket. Smith extends his right hand and taps open the audio attachment in the email. Smith stands up. Holding his phone, he strides to David's folding table. He points the phone's speaker toward the row of microphones on the table. He presses the play button on the screen. David's roars instantly explode through the 5 microphones, amplified by the hall's sound system. There's no record left. You have no evidence. Shut your mouth. The voice on the recording was crystal clear, with the sound of water flushing away paper ashes in the background. The hall fell silent instantly, leaving only David's heavy breathing from the speakers. David's eyes widened abruptly. He stared fixedly at the phone in Smith's hand, his face twitching violently. He extended both hands, pressing hard against the edge of the table as he stood up abruptly. The black folding chair behind him toppled backward, crashing heavily onto the wooden floor. Smith raised his other hand, holding a small voice recorder up to David's mouth. Captain, please explain. Who is the person in this recording burning the field diary? What were you doing behind the embankment between 3:15 and 6:30 in the afternoon? David's chest heaved violently. He reached out with his right hand, grabbing the black microphone stand and shoving it forcefully outward. The metal stand clattered to the ground, emitting a sharp, piercing screech as the sound system erupted with a loud burst of static. David circled around the folding table, pushing Smith aside. Smith stumbled back 2 steps, bumping into another reporter's shoulder. All the cameramen hoisted their equipment, aiming their lenses at David's face. A dazzling barrage of camera flashes lit up the entire hall. David lowered his head, shielding his face with both hands, and sprinted toward the emergency exit at the side of the hall. The portly public relations agent glanced at the surging crowd of reporters, then turned and slipped away through a side door. David reached the red iron door, gripping the metal handle with both hands and pressing down hard. He rammed his shoulder against the door, forcing it open. Outside, 2 green military jeeps were parked. 4 military police officers in white helmets stood on the steps, clad in camouflage uniforms and holding black batons. The lead MP captain ascended the steps, pulling a document stamped with a red seal from his pocket. He held it up before David's eyes. David, the military has officially issued a warrant for your arrest. You are suspected of murder. David halted, his hands hanging limply at his sides. He glanced back over his shoulder. More than 20 reporters, wielding cameras and phones, crowded the emergency exit doorway. Every lens trained on him. 2 MPs stepped forward, seizing David's arms from either side. They twisted his hands behind his back, and a silver metal handcuff snapped shut around his wrists with a sharp click. The MPs pushed David toward the back seat of the Jeep. He hung his head, his leather shoes dragging across the concrete. I tapped the screen of my tablet with my right index finger. The live feed cut off, the screen turning pure black. I picked up the black landline phone beside me and dialed Richard's internal number. "David is in the vehicle," I said. Richard chuckled on the other end of the line. "Well done, Elena. Now all the media are looking for that woman named Sarah. Where is she now?" I replied, "Her car is parked outside the Public Welfare Center downtown." I hung up the phone and reopened my tablet, accessing a backdoor program into the hospital's internal system. At 7 o'clock this morning, Sarah, experiencing stomach pain, drove her old, smoke-belching car to a private maternity hospital. She slapped her health insurance card onto the marble counter at the front desk. The receptionist inserted the card into the reader, and a red warning box popped up on the system. David had been suspended by the military, resulting in the cancellation of all dependent medical benefits. Sarah's ex-husband's account was also frozen. I pulled up the surveillance footage from the hospital lobby. In the video, Sarah, visibly pregnant, stood before the front desk wearing a grimy gray coat. She pointed a finger at the nurse's face. The nurse shook her head and handed her a lengthy bill. Sarah snatched the bill, tearing it in half with force before hurling the pieces into the nurse's face. 2 security guards in black uniforms approached, each taking one of Sarah's arms and dragging her out through the revolving glass door. Sarah's left high-heeled shoe fell off, leaving her to step barefoot onto the concrete outside. The guards tossed her handbag at her feet. Sarah bent down, picked up the shoe, and put it back on. She walked to the parking lot and got into her old car. I closed the hospital surveillance feed and switched to the live feed from the city traffic cameras. Sarah's car was parked outside the public free clinic on 7th Street. On the benches outside the clinic, 2 homeless individuals lay covered with newspapers. Black garbage bags were piled high in the corner, flies buzzing above them. Sarah pushed the car door open, holding a plastic folder as she slowly walked to the clinic's glass door. She pulled it open and stepped inside. I switched to the footage from inside the clinic's waiting area. The hall was packed with people. Sarah walked to the very end of the line. In front of her stood a thin, frail man who was coughing. Sarah lowered her head. She leaned against the yellowed wall, clutching her stomach tightly with both hands. This was the security she had wanted. She had gone along with David's lies. She moved into my house. She took my job. Now, that house was filled with mud and toxic mold. That job had left her facing a lawsuit for millions in breach of contract penalties. Now, she could only stand in line with the homeless, begging a doctor for a free bottle of painkillers. I closed the tablet. I stood up. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window in my office. The traffic in Manhattan crawled slowly below. Yellow taxis looked like tiny blocks. Across the street, a group of investors in expensive suits were entering an upscale restaurant. I turned and walked toward the mahogany desk. On it lay a public relations contract for a new client. I picked up the black pen, unscrewed the cap, and prepared to begin my afternoon's work. 7 in the morning. Heavy rain was falling in New York. Raindrops beat against the glass window with a rapid, tapping sound. I stood before the bathroom mirror. I turned on the silver faucet. The cold water streamed out, hitting the white ceramic sink. I cupped my hands under the cold water and splashed it on my face. Droplets ran down my chin and dripped onto the floor. I picked up the white dry towel beside me and vigorously wiped my face dry. I turned and walked into the bedroom. I opened the wooden wardrobe door. I took out a black silk shirt, unbuttoned it, and put it on. I pulled out a deep black suit jacket and slipped it on. I put on a pair of crisp black trousers. I walked to the entryway and stepped into a pair of black flat leather shoes. I picked up the black leather briefcase from the table. I unzipped the metal zipper at the top, reached inside to confirm the thick yellow manila envelope was still there, then zipped it shut. I grabbed my keys, pushed the door open, and walked out. I walked to the curb and raised my right hand. A yellow taxi pulled up in front of me. I opened the rear door and got in. To JFK Airport, I told the driver. The car moved along the waterlogged road. Tires rolled through puddles, sending up large splashes. I turned my head to look out the window. the glow of streetlights reflected on the wet surface. The car stopped at the airport terminal entrance. I pushed the door open and stepped out. I entered the hall, walked to the self-check-in kiosk, pulled out my passport, and placed it on the glass scanner. The machine spat out a white boarding pass. I took it. I passed through security and walked to the gate. I pulled out a metal chair and sat down to wait. A woman's voice came over the loudspeaker. I stood up, queued to board the plane, found my seat, and fastened my seatbelt. The plane taxied on the runway, engines roaring loudly. It broke through the clouds. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my seat. The sound of tires screeching against the tarmac echoed. The plane landed at an airport in Texas. I slung my bag over my shoulder and stepped off the plane. The Texas sun was blindingly bright. A wave of heat hit me. I walked to the taxi stand and got into a white sedan. To Leavenworth Military Prison, I said. 2 in the afternoon. I stood outside the prison's main gate. 2 guards with rifles stood on either side of the iron door. I walked over, took out my driver's license and visitation appointment slip from my pocket, and handed them to the guard on the left. The guard glanced at the list, nodded, and pressed a red button on the wall. The heavy iron door emitted a loud grinding sound as it slowly slid open on both sides. I walked in, passing through a long corridor with gray concrete walls. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly. I arrived at the visitation room. In the center was a large pane of bulletproof glass with a row of small metal holes beneath it. On either side of the glass was a black telephone. I pulled out the metal chair on the right and sat down. I placed my briefcase flat on the metal tabletop. 5 minutes later, the iron door on the other side of the glass opened. 2 guards escorted David in. David was wearing an orange prison uniform, his hands cuffed, with a chain between the cuffs dragging on the floor with a clattering sound. David's hair had turned completely white. His eye sockets were deeply sunken, and his chin was covered in a messy beard. The guards seated David in the chair, unlocked the cuff on his right hand, and fastened it to an iron ring on the edge of the table. Then they stepped back to the door. David reached out with his left hand and picked up the black telephone receiver from the wall. I extended my right hand, picked up the receiver on my side, and held it to my ear. Through the receiver came David's hurried breathing. He pressed his face against the bulletproof glass, his nose leaving a white imprint on the surface.
Anna.
You finally came. David's voice was hoarse to the extreme. I looked at him. I remained silent. David swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed. He said, "The court is delivering the verdict tomorrow. They're going to sentence me to 20 years. Sarah pushed all the blame onto me. She lied to the investigators. She gave false testimony." I continued to look at him. David slapped the metal table with his left hand. He said, "Elena, help me. Write a character reference for me. Tell the judge I was once a good soldier. Just sign it, and I'll give the house back to you. That 4-bedroom villa, I'll relinquish all ownership rights. All of it to you. You can move back in right away." I laid the receiver flat on the table. I unzipped my briefcase. I took out the yellow manila envelope. I untied the white string around it. I pulled out the 3 sheets of A4 paper inside. I pressed the first sheet against the bulletproof glass. David squinted. He leaned closer to the glass. It was the housing inspection report issued by the city health department, stamped with a red warning seal. In bold black font in the middle of the report, it read, "Severe structural collapse present in the property. Basement infested with highly toxic black mold. Hazard level, extreme. Estimated mandatory cleanup cost, $150,000. David's eyes slowly widened. I set down the first sheet. I pressed the second sheet against the glass. It was a summary of fines issued by the Community Homeowners Association. Each line listed a violation: dead lawn, damaged exterior walls, illegal sewage discharge. The total amount at the bottom, $42,000. David's lips began to tremble. He shouted into the receiver, "That's impossible. It's only been a few days." I set down the second sheet. I pressed the third sheet against the glass. It was a mortgage contract from a private lending company. David had signed it last week. In bold red font at the very bottom, it stated, "Total amount due including penalty interest in case of default, $80,000. I neatly stacked the 3 sheets together. I picked up the black receiver from the table. I said to David, "The day you brought Sarah home, you said you were giving the house to her. You said you wanted to give her security." David stared fixedly at the papers in my hand. His left hand gripped the edge of the metal chair tightly, his knuckles white. I took out the final document from my briefcase. It was an unconditional transfer of property and associated debts. I took out a black pen. I removed the cap. I looked at David. I said, "You gave the house to her. Today, I am giving this house back to you, along with all the mold inside, all the bills, all the high-interest loans. From today onward, this house, along with the attached $272,000 in debt, belongs entirely to you alone." I lowered my head. At the very bottom of the transfer document, I signed the name Elena. I picked up the transfer document and slid it through the metal file slot beneath the bulletproof glass. The paper slid across the metal slot and stopped beside David's hand. David suddenly stood up, as if gone mad. He began pounding the bulletproof glass frantically with his left hand. The glass made loud, booming sounds. He shouted into the phone, "Take it back." I refused to accept it. "Take it away." I looked at him. I said, "You already confirmed your status as the sole owner on the high-interest loan contract. This transfer document is merely a legal, unilateral confirmation of ownership. You have no right to refuse. The debt collection agency will come to the prison to see you tomorrow." David gasped for breath. With his left hand, he grabbed the paper and tore it in half with force. He threw the torn pieces at the glass. The shreds fluttered down onto the metal table. I said, "I have digital backups. The debt is already in your name." I placed the black pen back into my briefcase. I also put the 3 bills back inside. I zipped it up. I hung the telephone receiver back on the black plastic hook on the wall. The guard by the door walked over. The guard grabbed David's shoulder and forcefully pressed him back into the chair. David struggled desperately. He opened his mouth wide, shouting at me. I couldn't hear his voice. The bulletproof glass blocked everything. I picked up my briefcase. I turned around. Step by step, I walked toward the door of the visitation room. I pushed open the iron door. I walked out into the sunlight outside. I walked to the roadside. I opened the door of a black taxi. I got into the back seat, to the municipal shelter on 7th Street, then to the airport. I told the driver. The car drove forward along the road. The cacti by the roadside receded into the distance. 40 minutes later, the car stopped across the street from the municipal shelter. I rolled down the window. A long line stretched outside the shelter entrance. A group of homeless people in tattered clothes held plastic bowls in their hands. Sarah stood at the very end of the line. Her belly was swollen high. She wore a dirty men's jacket. Her hair was matted, clinging tightly to her scalp. She was barefoot, standing in a muddy puddle filled with filthy water. She held half of a leftover hard bread in her hand, biting into it forcefully. Crumbs fell onto her collar. A garbage truck drove past her, its wheels splashing dark brown muddy water all over the hem of her skirt. She showed no reaction, continuing to chew on the hard bread. I pressed the window button, and the glass slowly rose, blocking the view outside. "To the airport," I said. The plane landed in the night, and I returned to New York. I walked to the corner cafe, pushed open the glass door, and the wind chime at the entrance rang crisply. Approaching the counter, I ordered a hot Americano. The barista handed me a white paper cup, which I cradled in both hands. I sat down at a wooden table by the window. My phone lit up with a news notification. The screen displayed a bold headline, "Former Officer David sentenced to 20 years for multiple felonies. Properties seized and auctioned off insolvent." I extended my right index finger, pressed the screen, and swiped left. The news disappeared completely from view. I lifted the paper cup and took a sip of coffee. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. I slipped my phone into my pocket, picked up my briefcase, pushed open the cafe door, and stepped into the crowds of Manhattan.